Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this pre-arrival webinar today, brought to you by Berkeley International Office. This is the Grad Student Academic Success webinar. My name is Catherine Greco, and I'm an International Student Advisor here at UC Berkeley's International Office. It's a real pleasure to meet you today and to be one of the first faces that you're seeing or having contact with in terms of coming to UC Berkeley. Before I was an International Student Advisor, I was a high school and community college teacher for 17 or so years. So I think that's why Bio has put me in charge of presenting the academic success programs, because I have some experience in the teaching arena that may be helpful or offer some insight into the undertaking you're about to go through. Let's begin. Let's talk academic success at UC Berkeley. Oh, and I will say, all of you have been selected to come to UC Berkeley, so you must know something of academic success for sure. I want to kind of stress here in this video or this presentation, what are some of the things that kind of culturally make UC Berkeley a particular place, or what are some of sort of the cultural things that make US education a particular thing? Every once in a while, there may be some trickiness translating what academic success was for you in your home country versus what academic success is here in the US or here at UC Berkeley. So I'd like to touch on some of those things. The vast majority of these things will be easily translated by you because, again, you were accepted to UC Berkeley. So you must know something of this already and be ready to run hard when you get here. But these will be extra pointers to help you along the way. Nice to meet you. I mentioned again, my name is Catherine Greco. Here's my email address at the bottom. It's kgreco@berkeley.edu. You're absolutely welcome to email me if you have questions after the presentation. We are going to go through about 4 or 5 different sections in this talk. And so here's the title of the first section. At the end of each section, I'll pause and see if there are questions, and I'll look at the chat. You're welcome to put questions in the chat beforehand, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to see them until I get to the end of that section. And then there will be a large Q&A section at the end. No other bio advisor is here to help moderate the comments or the questions in the chat. So if I don't notice what you've said, feel free to type it again towards the end of a section that I'm in, or feel free to just speak up and ask me a question at the end of a section as well, okay? So let's just talk about the academic model. What does the UC education system look like? So in the US and most US universities, the university system is broken into several colleges or schools. So university is universal or universe. It means a universe or a world of a lot of different schools or colleges. You can see here on the right that in this yellow box, there are about 12 or 13 different colleges or schools within the UC Berkeley system. Some of these serve undergrads and grads, and some of these serve only grads. Many of you will have been able to very easily pick out which school you'll be attending. Within those schools are departments, and sometimes the department then has separate majors, and sometimes the department and the major are one and the same. Let's look at what I mean. Have a look at these examples. So at the College of Letters and Science, which is our humanities college, there's a Department of Biological Sciences, so the biology department, in other words. And within the biology department, you might be getting a master's in molecular and cell biology, or you might be getting a PhD in neurobiology and genetics, something like that. So notice that on the left-hand example, the department is separate or different than the different majors that you can get underneath it. There are numerous majors you could get in the biological sciences department. Not every college works that way. In some other colleges, the department and the major are one and the same. So have a look at the College of Engineering side. Within the College of Engineering, there's a Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So meaning, city planning and transportation, things like that, buildings and so on. And if you're in the Civil and Environmental Engineering department, then that's also your major name. This isn't something that you need to kind of know for your day-to-day, but I think it's helpful when you're talking to your peers, other grad students, and trying to understand kind of what they're saying in terms of, the department they're in versus the major they're in. You could be in one of these situations or the other. I think this next section is pretty important. So what kinds of classes will I have? There are 4 or 5 different types of classes that are quite typical in an American university system. And the expectations and the sizes of those classes and what they look like or what you do in those classes really differs. So let's talk through each of these. The first example of a type of class is a lecture. You will have a lot of lectures towards the beginning of your graduate program, and as you start specializing into your very focused area of research, particularly for PhDs, you'll be getting down to classes of just 3, 4, 5 people who are doing your very special focused thing. But you may start with a lecture. Notice how many people are in this lecture hall. This is clearly pre-COVID, so during COVID, we'll have masks, or we'll have sparser classrooms, or we'll have required vaccinations and so on. But a lecture is led by a professor, often very large, sometimes hundreds of students, and the professor needs to move through a lot of material quickly. So there's not never room to ask questions or to pick clarification on something, but it's rarer for the lecturer to call on you or for you to be able to jump up and say, hey, I've got a question here. So, there would be limited, verbal participation. You certainly are required to, of course, pay attention, but there would be limited verbal participation in general in a lecture. Other types of classes, a lab, studio, workshop, or field work. These can be led by a professor, but also by a GSI, grad student instructor. And some of you actually may have upcoming grad student instructor jobs. So even though you're grad students, your classes will also be led by grad students who have gotten further along in the program than you have. So particularly these labs and studios could be led by a GSI. They're located in a special type of classroom that has specialized equipment. And that specialized equipment and the size of that classroom limits the number of people in that class. But it means that things are really hands-on, that you have a chance to talk with people, and that you're often, expected or required to be interacting with groups. Maybe you're doing, in this top picture, maybe these 4 people are working together in this, large scientific machine. So they'd be expected to collaborate and speak together and so on. There's a great deal of interaction in these settings. One note about the phrase fieldwork. Some of you may be, for example, in the architecture program or the city planning program, and so you're going out into the field. That means you're leaving the UC Berkeley campus to go look at something related to your field. So you may be touring the architecture of San Francisco, or you may be in an education program and you are going to do an internship in an elementary school in Oakland here, which is a city right by Berkeley. So in that case, you'd be doing in the field work or field work. Some of these courses have a separate classroom or lecture component with them, and some of them don't, but you could expect that they might. A seminar class. You will, as grad students, start having some seminar classes towards the end of your studies, or once you've kind of done the initial big classes. Seminars are small, usually 5 to 20 people, usually led by a professor, could be led by a GSI. You generally seated around a table, or you move your desks into a circle so that you can see and speak with each other easily. And you're going to be discussing big picture ideas in your field, and conversation is absolutely required in these. What are big picture ideas, and is that something that everybody's going to be doing? I would say that at the master's and PhD level, no matter what your degree is, you will be doing some of these big picture ideas. And computer science, most of your classes are going to be coding, but some of your classes will be about what are the limits of AI, or what are the ethics of AI. Those in a civil engineering field may be learning about autonomous vehicles, but you'll also need to discuss what are the limits and what are the ethics of autonomous vehicles. How do we prevent crashes, and how do we balance safety with progress or efficiency? Those in those in journalism will have a lot of discussions about the style and the tone of journalist A's piece versus journalist B's piece on the same piece of news or the same event. Or you may look at the ethics of citing unnamed sources and things like that. So everybody will have some big idea type seminar courses. And this is actually a real hallmark of American education in particular. I think that this is a spot where I've found, and I will say this as a person who taught international students for many, many years, this seminar classes were often a spot where some international students kind of struggled because they weren't sure how to say things or what to say or when to say things. I really, really encourage you to lean in on that with your GSI. And so say to your GSI, I read the reading, but I've got a lot to think. I've got a lot of things that I want to think about or say, but I just am not quite sure how to get in. And let your GI or GSI or your professor know that, and they can kind of cue you or give you like a little bit of a hand in for a while until you're feeling more comfortable. I really encourage you to do that because the seminar is a kind of a seminal part of an American education. Last type of class you'll have in large is called the section class. And this is usually led by a grad student instructor, usually 20 to 30 students. So imagine that big lecture of 200 or 300 students where the professor is just going with big concepts and detailed formulas and so on. How will you break all of that information down? How will you get practice at it? And how will you be able to discuss any of the sticky areas where you're struggling? You can do that in the section. So the GSI may give you homework set problems or review problems, and then you'll be working through those together with the GSI. You'll be doing a deeper or slower explanation of tricky concepts, and individual and peer work is expected here, and participation is expected. Let's talk a little about different ways to be responsible for your own learning. Again, you all have been accepted to UC Berkeley, so I think you must be responsible for your own learning already. And you probably know a lot of things like this or have done a lot of these things already. But I want to make you familiar with these key concepts that are part of a standard US educational system. So make sure that you understand the unit system. UC Berkeley assigns each class a number of units based on how hard the class is or what the workload of the class is. So have a look for a lecture or seminar class. If the class is called a 1-unit class, it means that there's going to be 1 hour of week there will be 1 hour in the week where you're meeting in class. And then you'd be expected to do 2 hours of work like homework or studies on your own for that 1-unit course. If you're in a 2-unit course, you'd expect to double that. 2 hours of in-person study and then 4 hours of student work per week. So studying and homework and prep and writing and so on. So that's kind of how the unit system works. So you might be in a 2-unit class or a 4-unit class. That 4-unit class is going to take a lot much more of your attention and your time. For lab, studio, workshop, or fieldwork courses, 1 unit equals 3 hours of time in that lab. So notice that 1 unit essentially equals about 3 hours, whether it's 1 hour in class and 2 of study or 3 hours of time in the lab. But 1 unit is generally equivalent to 3 hours of your time. Professors can add additional units to courses or, kind of like raise the value of the course by adding additional units if the lecture has a section as well. So you may be going to that big 400-person lecture and then to the 30-person section led by your GSI. If that lecture course has a section, it might be adding 1 more unit to give you credit for having, or to point out that you're going to be taking more time on that subject because you've got the lecture and the section. There may be 1 extra unit added if the course load is quite heavy. So heavy reading, heavy concepts, or a lot of lab. Let's talk about full-time units and enrollment. Both immigration regulations, so your F1 or J1 visa immigration regulations, and your college have a requirement that you are enrolled full-time. But now the question is, what is full-time enrollment? For grad students, both masters and PhDs, this can get tricky. I will say in general, full-time enrollment according to your immigration status, so F1 or J1 status, is being enrolled in 12 units per semester or more. Now, there are some colleges where they say, no, our load is going to be 7 units per semester and 7 units is plenty. So if your college has said, nope, for your program, 7 units per semester is full-time, then we at Bio also say, okay, then 7 units per semester for your program is just fine. You don't need to worry about whether you need to tell us, so, hey, I'm in program X bio, so don't stress that I'm not enrolled in 12 units. I only need to be enrolled in 7. You don't have to tell us that. We have a lot of computer systems here at UC Berkeley that can figure those things out. But we will email you if you are under enrolled, meaning that you're not meeting your immigration regulations. And again, we touch our immigration regulations at Berkeley to what your department requires. If they require less than 12, then we touch it there. Many require 12, and so we put it there for others. Let's talk a little about sample major requirements. And for this, I'm going to stop sharing this particular screen and share another screen. So give me one moment. I've opened these different web pages for us to look at. Let's see. Okay, so let's look at just understanding what your course requirements are, or what the structure of a degree is. So I've opened 4 different examples. So here's a PhD in architecture, and here's a general explanation of the program, the fields of study. So there are 2 main fields in architecture, and then the faculty and so on. Then the requirements are here. So, for a PhD in architecture, here are the requirements. They look small, but notice it's 2 years in residence, 1 semester of course in each research method, foreign language requirements, 1 to 2 outside fields of study. So this means like you're getting other degrees in addition to architecture, written qualifying exam, and then finally the dissertation. So this list is short, but each of these items takes a long time. Here are some general pieces of information about the architecture course requirements. But then here, I'm going to open this. Here's a PhD handbook for those in architecture during the History, Theory, and Society of Architecture program. And so notice now I've opened this PDF and it's 29 pages. But this will be the handbook or guidebook for any student in the architecture program looking to really understand what the requirements of a degree are. So that's one example. Let's look at journalism. So if you're getting a master's in journalism, your coursework will look like this. You've got a first semester, a summer internship, and then a master's project. Then there are degree requirements and so on. So let's just kind of look in. So we've got these 2 courses you'll be taking. There's a description of what the summer internship is. Then there's the master's project. So what will that look like? And then, further down is degree requirements. So there's required courses and so on. And then additional requirements for all students. It's not important that we look at all of this together right now, but what I'm trying to show you is that you can see already there's a slight difference in how architecture versus journalism presents their coursework or their requirements. And you want to kind of be very familiar with what your department is doing. Just a few other quick examples. Here's from the MBA program. So the MBA program mentions what courses or what topics they'll be covering in the first year in fall A and B, and spring A and B, and so on. And you can click through this. Final example that I want to show you is courses. This is for civil and environmental engineering. Notice this. So required courses for Plan 1 and 2. You'll take 3 of the following of these. You'll take at least 9 units from the 3 core areas below. So notice that they've got area 1, 2, and 3 here, and you'd need 9 units, but they've got these special parameters, but no more than 6 to 7 units in any one area. So these are things that you'll want to focus on really particularly as you're choosing your courses. I know this may feel kind of self-explanatory to many, but I think that for others, if you're floundering for like, what exactly is my main roadmap through this PhD or this master's degree program, looking at this sort of course layout that we're doing right now is exactly what will help you understand that a little better. Let me return now to, oh, you know what, let me actually stay on the screen that I was on. I think that would be more helpful for a moment. I'm going to make sure I'm still sharing the proper screen. Another tip that I have for you is to really understand the syllabus. A syllabus is something that you're going to get for every class at the beginning of this semester. And it's usually a few pages of documents. Sometimes now it's just online. And syllabus is a Latin word, and US in Latin is a singular ending. Plural of syllabus is syllabi, B-A-I. So you'll hear people talk about a syllabus or a lot of syllabi. The syllabus is your sort of crib sheet for that particular class. It will tell you who your professor is, who your GSI is, when you're meeting, what the materials are that you need. It will often have a list of assignments and projects due, a list of quizzes, exams, and tests, a list of writing that's due and when it's due. It will always list your professors and your GSI's office hours. They're required to have them. And then it will also list some standard information at the end. So information on getting assistance if you're a disabled student, information on how to drop a course if you need to drop the course, a reminder of Berkeley's academic integrity policy. So these things are standard, but now in the middle of all of that, you're going to find that each syllabus is quite different from the next one. So let's just look at a few examples. I'm in the mechanical engineering courses syllabus catalog, and I'm just going to open this one. Let's see. And I had hoped that we would open a syllabus. I had checked these before we did this, and now I'm struggling. Oh, here's title and sample of syllabi. Notice here's a plural of syllabus, right? So syllabi, and here's a singular. Let's look at modeling and simulation of advanced manufacturing processes. So we've got the course description. We've got the required materials. We've got the course goals and the desired outcomes. We've got the topics to be covered. Then we've got a kind of expectation of how long you'll be studying, what your contribution to the course will be, and then assessment. There will be 8 course projects, 50% to 6.25% each of the grade, and then the final exam is 50%. Okay, so this is a brief syllabus, right? Let's look at another. Another discipline. So now I'm in mechanical. Oh, we just looked at this one. I couldn't find the syllabus here. Now I'm in sociology. Let's have a look at sociology 88. So here we've got the professor listed and the office hours listed. TBD, to be determined. So the other people associated with this course are to be determined. Here's the student who's going to be grading the work. The course goals and the course format are listed here. Notice, during part 1 of the course, when we're learning about research and policy, we'll mostly use our time in seminar-style discussion. During part 2, 3, and 4, when we're learning more practical skills and working on projects, we'll have brief lectures and do in-class lab exercises together. So notice that this is going to be very different than a class where you're sitting and getting formulas all the time. You'll be required to be at those seminars. Grading. Students will complete their choice of 4 out of 5 assignments for 50% of their full grade and a final project for 30%. The remaining 20% of the grade is for participation, including required written comments on the works of peers and responsible and effective participation in the final group project. So notice that, if you're in the sociology course, speaking in this seminar style discussion is highly not optional. It's required. It's up to 20% of your grade. Then you'll be working with your peers and looking at their work and reviewing it and offering constructive criticism to your peers. That's part of your participation grade. And working effectively in your final group project is also part of that grade. So notice there's information on the readings, on attendance. Attendance is required unless you're observing a religious holiday, etc. But notice that some other classes will say attendance is not required, which is a little shocking, I think, for some students coming from overseas. And frankly, to me as a former teacher, it's depressing to hear that sometimes attendance isn't required. But notice that attendance is required. Accommodations. So anybody who has a disabled student has an intellectual disability, the professor will provide accommodations as required by the disabled student programs specialist, so a coordinator there. Here's a policy on late work, the grading policy generally. Here's the standard academic honesty code. I'm going to keep scrolling through a little. Here's the course outline. So here's what you study each week. And here's what you'd be reading each week. So you have this sense of what it is you'd be reading and so on. Notice that the weeks get a little heavier as you go, right? What you're doing each week gets a little longer. And then the final project due May 6th at 5 p.m. So notice that this syllabus is a lot more in-depth than the one we just saw. You will get some syllabi that are very, very brief and others that are really, really long. Please, please take an hour or so and read over each syllabus that you get and highlight detailed information. This is your crib sheet and your way to success in this course. You don't want to say, hey, I didn't know that I had to speak in seminar because I didn't speak in my last seminar, in my last class, and it didn't matter. You don't want to say that to your professor because your professor will say, I told you in the syllabus that speaking up or participating is 20% of your grade, so you should have known. This is kind of the Bible for your class. A few other sample syllabi. Let's look at this sample syllabus on the biological clocks class. So instructor, a lot of TBD, so to be determined. But this would be filled in by the time that you actually were in the class. Required readings, so they've got information here. The course description and student presentations. Then they've got the grading listed here. No makeup exams, so please do not miss the exams. Notice that some professors have a makeup exam policy. Others' policy is that I don't have them, so don't ask. Don't be sick. If you're sick, it's too bad. Notice that. That may seem harsh, but you know from day one, right? And that's what the professor wants you to understand, is that their rules are in the syllabus. Notice we've got something similar to what we saw last time, but this is much briefer. So what are we doing each week and how does it work? What pages are we reading in the textbook? Here's a discussion topic. So this is a discussion course as well. There will be some review and some presentations. And notice this is probably when students are doing presentations and so on. And here are the student presentation topics. And it looks like, so here's the presentation topic, and here are the various sources you'll be reading to make those presentations. Final one, let's look, I'll get to this next slide in a minute. I hope that was helpful and not too much of a departure from the standard presentation. Let me get back to the PowerPoint that I was presenting to you. Let's see. Here we are. So we've just looked at some of those major requirements together. I mentioned to you about knowing the syllabus. It's your Bible for that class. I'll give you just a moment very briefly here to look over these bulleted notes. I mentioned all of these things already, but just so that you see again and you know what a syllabus is, I'll just give you one moment to look at this. And we've looked at a few sample syllabi as well. My next piece of advice for you to be responsible for your own learning and your own academic success at UC Berkeley is to go to office hours. Every professor and GSI has office hours, so it's at least 1 hour a week, maybe more, where they're sitting in a specific spot, often their office, but sometimes it can be a coffee shop or a library, but they tell you where they're going to be at that time. And you can go and talk to them about any questions you've got with the class. If you can't attend at those times, it's okay. Let the professor at GSI know that you've got a conflict and you want to meet them at some other time, and they should be able to accommodate that if you give them some advance notice. Office hours are about mindset, and I want to say this to you as a former teacher. I want you to really try to see office hours as a way to engage more deeply in your field of study. It's not a chore that you have to face only when you're struggling in a course. I think this is a big cultural shift, and I did find this with actually not just my international students, but a lot of my American students as well when I was teaching, that I would hold office hours and there would be a lot of shame in students' faces when they entered my room for office hours, and that was too bad because, my students were bright and, went on to be quite successful, and they didn't need to come to me with shame in their eyes because they had a question or confusion about the class. And many times they would sneak in. They didn't want people to know they're coming to office hours because they just wanted to talk more about the topic at hand. They weren't confused at all. They were just interested in learning more. So I really want to encourage you to have the mindset that office hours are an opportunity to engage more deeply with your field. In the US, again, office hours are not just for struggling students, and they're not a punishment. They're a chance to meet your professor in GSI and discuss your major and to ask advice. I'll give you just a moment to read the 7 green headings here about what things you might do during office hours. These are all really acceptable and really, honestly quite smooth, socially smooth ways to go to office hours and kind of introduce yourself to the people who are, in your field. So take a moment and look at these. I think many of you are going to be GSIs, and you will soon find out, if you haven't already, that many of your office hours are going to be kind of empty or just have 1 or 2 students in them at a time. And then just before a big exam or a test or a paper is due or a very tricky homework is due, all of a sudden you've got 40 students in your office hours, and you can't possibly help 40 students in the way that you can help 4. And sometimes students leave a little disgruntled or irritated after those sorts of big sessions because they say, why did I waste my time going to office hours? But that's indicative of the point that office hours aren't meant only for that crisis or crunch time just before some big exam, that office hours are really meant to be time where you go before you need help, to talk about concepts that are unusual or to ask about best practices and to get some guidance and advice. They're not just meant to be a thing where you go just in the moment of crisis before an exam. So I know many of you as GSIs will be facing that pressure with your undergrad students, but I want you to keep it in mind for yourselves as students when you're going to your own professors and GSIs. Next, pay attention to your grade point average, or GPA. The GPA is a standard way of measuring how a student is doing grade-wise in a university across the US. So for every grade that you get, if you look at the yellow box here, in a class, you might get an A+ or an A or an A- or a B, and these are associated with percentages. So A+ is like 100%. Depending on the school, an A is somewhere between 96 to 99%. A- is, usually somewhere between 90 to 94%, or some schools make it like 92 to 95%. But at any rate, these are, you get these letter grades in these courses, but then those letter grades translate into a number. So an A+ is a 4. If you don't do too well, you get a C, so you're kind of doing average, you get a 2, and so on. So at the end of your first semester, you'll take all of those grades you've gotten. Let's say you got an A+, an A-, a B, and a B-. You'll have those 4 grades from your 4 classes. You'll assign one of these numbers to them and you'll average those. That's your GPA for your first semester. For your second semester, you'll do it again. Then you'll have kind of 2 GPAs going. You'll have your semesterly GPA. So once you've taken your second semester, your current semester GPA is your GPA from just that second semester. But you'll also have a cumulative GPA, which is the average of this and this GPA together. And that cumulative GPA is kind of the big one that you're focusing on to make sure that that stays really high. If you are to transfer to another school, or if you're going into the workforce and they say, how are your grades? They might want to look at your transcripts, but they might just say, what's your GPA? And your transcripts actually will have your GPA written at the bottom. UC Berkeley has a student portal called Cal Central, which I'm sure you've seen already. Once you start taking classes, the academic section will load with your class names and numbers. And then at the end of the semester, your grades will be there and your GPA will automatically be calculated for you. A lot of students, though, like to kind of look at what their GPA could be. So you can use a GPA calculator, and UC Berkeley has a GPA calculator for you to use. You can just Google that to find that. Next, please be engaged. Your professors and your GSIs are here to help you. Before I go on to the academic integrity section, I'll pause for a moment and check the chat to see if there are any questions. Jana or Jana, I'm sorry if I'm not getting the name correctly. Where do we find information about the minimum number of units needed for our program? Your program will tell you, Jana. It's a good question. So, and on our UC Berkeley website, we have a list of the standard deviance from that 12 units. So, I think it's journalism. I say this, but my journalism students don't take it for granted for sure. I believe journalism is 7 to 8 units per semester. Any grad program that has kind of unusual numbers, we've got it listed on our bio website, and your department will also be able to tell you. At the end of this, once I stop the PowerPoint, I'll make a note now that we'll go look on the bio website for those units. Okay, Aditi, when do departments usually release their syllabi for each course on offer? This is a great question, Aditi, and I want you to get used to hearing this sort of response at UC Berkeley. It depends. Every department is different, and every major is different, and then even within every major, every professor is different. So for these really large sections, so an intro to sociology course, which you may not be taking as a master's degree student, but a sort of intro master's course may have 4 or 5 sections, and in one department, all of those professors write one syllabus and they just put their own name at the top. In another department, there may be 5 intro level courses, all the exact same course taught by 5 professors, but each of these professors will write a different syllabus and have completely different grading standards. So that's something to note. In addition, then, there's some irregularity in when you can expect the syllabus, and it's per course and per professor. So sometimes you should be able to get the syllabus now. If you've been able to enroll in your courses, you can go onto Cal Central, click through. There's another website called Canvas that you may get access to that often holds a syllabus now in electronic form. You can get it there sometimes now, and other times you won't get it until the first day of class. Aditi, I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer, but I think for students coming to Berkeley, it's helpful to know that if you don't have a syllabus for class A, but you do for class B, it's not that the professor from class A is late or anything. It's just that the professor from class A has a different style. And you'll notice that across the US education system, that really the professor is sort of the master of how that class works. And one professor is going to get things out really early, and one professor gets things out just as it's needed. And you kind of need to learn to float along with that. Sanjaya, how do we get the syllabus for our program before the start date, or do we need to ask the departmental advisors for the same? This is kind of the same question, Sanjaya. It is actually okay for you to go to the department and say, I'm enrolled in such and such course, I don't see a syllabus, when can I expect it? Or could I see a syllabus from a previous year so I get my head around what to expect? Of course, know that course content could change significantly. The professor could change the grading system significantly, and so on. Siddharth, as a GSI, how does one politely end office hours attended by 40 students? Oh, this is such a good question. And Siddharth, I would say that as a GSI, you're going to have some real clout or authority with your students. You don't want to wield it kind of angrily or unnecessarily, but you can tell students and prep them in the classes you're giving. So let's say you've got 4 more classes before a major exam. Start telling your students 4 classes before, hey guys, don't forget my office hours. Here are things that are going to be tricky on this exam. I need you to start looking at them now to decide if you need assistance with it, and start coming to me now. And tell the students, if the day before the exam you come to my office hours and it's swarmed with 40 of you, I'm going to have to triage. I'm going to have to say, how many of you have concerns with issue A? How many of you have concerns with issue B? And if more of you have concerns with issue B, I'm going to have to focus on that. I'm not going to be able to help those with issue A as much. So I think, Siddharth, the way to head that issue off is to really plan and prep your students in advance. And everybody, I would say, I would highly recommend, if you were GSIing an undergrad course, that you really, really prep students in this way. Graduate students usually are a little easier going. So if you're GSIing in a grad course, you won't have as much issue here. But I think for those big, 400, 200 seater lectures for undergrads, you want to really prep your students to not do that, or to tell them that for obvious reasons you cannot give the attention you need to 40 students. Adish, how is the grading like at Cal? Can we expect a curve? When can we find the usual distribution, or where can we find the usual distribution for courses to assess how hard it will be? So Adish, this is a great question. I wouldn't necessarily look for the usual distribution of grades. I would look at the units. So how many units is that course? That's going to be an indication of how hard it is. For some students, doing the mathematical work or the more quantitative work of their field is trickier. For others, that big picture thinking and doing all the literature reading and review is going to be the harder thing. So, look at a syllabus and look at what is that syllabus telling you about what the course is going to be made of, to give you a gauge for you personally on what's going to be tricky. Can you expect a curve? It depends. Every course is different. My husband is actually a PhD student at Berkeley and has done a lot of GSIing, and he's GSI'd the same course year after year, but he GSIs it with different professors under different circumstances. Sometimes professors always curve a test. Sometimes they never do. Sometimes a professor says, you know what, I'm going to curve this test. I'm not curving the next one. So this is really, really individually up to the professor and up to the GSI as well. If you're a GSI in a course, you and your fellow GSIs will be working with the professor. Sometimes the professor will let you have some input on whether you think it should be curved or not. Sometimes the professor will say, nope, what I say goes. GSIs, I'm not interested in whether you think we should curve it or not. This is another example of a spot where it just depends on the professor. Sibam, when will I know if I have to be a GSI this semester? I'm sorry to say, it also depends. Some departments require you to be a GSI. Some departments require that you not be a GSI for a semester or two because they don't want you to work. They want you to kind of get into the habit of studying at Berkeley and understand the system before you take on the extra, duties of teaching or researching. So GSI is instructor, grad student instructor, or grad student researcher. Some of you will have a GSR position. Some departments require you to jump in immediately, and others say you can't. Others give you options. So Sibam, your question suggests to me that maybe in your department you're required at some point to do a GSI. This is going to be a question to ask your department directly. When will I know if I'm required? For others, you may be scrambling to try to find a GSI position. I know that in many departments, my husband's included, there just weren't as many GSI positions available as there were grad students who wanted them. So my husband actually GSI'd out of his department. He was a civil and environmental engineering major, but he was a GSI in the econ department. And that's totally fine. So, some of you may be scrambling to find a GSI position. I really encourage you in this case to look outside of your particular field. Just because you're going to be in the law school doesn't mean you only GSI in law. You could be GSIing in something that was connected to your undergraduate studies. Oh boy, I've got a lot more chats. Let me just read through all of them and see if I can kind of summarize answers so that I can keep going. I didn't realize there were so many, although I am actually really grateful for your participation here. Give me one moment. I'm sorry, Abish, I can't comment on how prerequisites for courses are handled. This is also a departmental thing, and it's a good question for your department. Here's one that I think somebody may be able to answer. When does enrollment for fall semester begin? If you could drop that answer in the chat, that would be helpful. I don't know the answer to that. Is there a website that will tell you the details of previous GSIs and readers? There are some websites that where you can kind of quote unquote rate your professor or your GSI. I strongly caution you to avoid those. As a former teacher myself, when I looked at those, I would find those reviews pretty unfair, and often I could figure out which of my students had written these reviews about me. Students who write poor reviews generally, not always, but generally, are students who are not doing well in the course. So I've found that those websites are pretty unhelpful and pretty unfair to the professor. You will hear through word of mouth that a professor has a particular style that you may or may not prefer, or a GSI has a particular style or way of teaching the class that is or isn't helpful. And I think that's good to know. And you may want to hear through word of mouth from your friends a little detail about this. But I think trying to look for these websites that rate your various teachers is not going to help you learn to navigate the US education system, where you've got to learn to jump at what your professor and GSI want. One wants something here and one wants something drastically different over here. part of your goal and part of your learning process, no matter what your field is to learn to jump to those different professors' expectations. And that's part of preparation for being, in the workforce as well. Oh, okay, I see it. 15th July is when you can start registering for fall. Okay, I see an employment question. I'm going to very, very quickly address this, but we do have a pre-arrival employment webinar as well that you could attend. Can international students work a remote job? So for example, I'm from Canada. While I'm at UC Berkeley, can I work for my job in Canada? Briefly, the answer is definitely not. While you are on US soil in F1 or J1 status, you cannot do work for a foreign company. I know that's frustrating to hear, but while you are on US soil, the US government has jurisdiction over what money is coming into your bank accounts and so on, and to what you're doing in the US. I'm sorry for that information. I know that's hard for some students to hear. My brief recommendation on employment is to always come talk to bio before you take any job on or off campus, here in the US or overseas. If you're considering taking a job while your feet are in the US in F1 or J1 status, please come talk with us before you take that job. Oftentimes you can do the job, but you need our authorization first, or you need us to kind of look at what the parameters of the job are and make sure that you follow those parameters. Some of the biggest immigration violations that can really hurt your chances here in the US immigration-wise are employment violations. So we want to take that very, very seriously. Thanks for your questions. GSI and tutoring, Alberto's got a great question. Are GSI and tutoring positions compatible with the F1 visa? Absolutely. All international students, F1 and J1, are able to do on-campus work. And GSIing and GSRing and tutoring are all on-campus work. F1 students, you can just do it. J1 students, you can do it, but you have to just tell us you're doing it. And we have to add it to your J1 record. Again, this will be gone over more in detail in the employment webinar, but I think these are important questions. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Siddharth, I see your question. I think this is, Siddharth, your question is getting into real technical detail and probably something really idiosyncratic to your case. I'd recommend you come talk with us at bio about that one. Okay, thanks for your patience, everybody. I'm going to move on to the next section. These next sections will be a little shorter. I'm also going to take a little drink because my throat's getting dry. Okay, let's talk academic integrity. This is the idea that you should fully and accurately represent what portion of your academic work is your own intellectual endeavor, and then what portion of that work is the intellectual endeavors of others that you're kind of relying on or using or commenting on. I think most of you, since you're coming in at the master's or PhD level, are well aware of this, but I just want to state it again that it is really important, and it's part of general education, but I think particularly in the US, it's really, really an important part of American education that whenever you're presenting work to your professor, you're able to say to your professor, this work is my original thought or kind of my original attempts at things, and I use these sources. I use these journals, I use these other people's papers, I use these ideas that have kind of been standard in our field for a while, and I use this brand new research, and I'm commenting on it, or I'm expanding it, or I'm disagreeing with it, or I'm qualifying it. So you want to be able to say a few things. What's mine? Or sorry, what sources have I relied on? What am I doing with them? Again, commenting, agreeing, disagreeing, qualifying, expanding. And then in doing those actions, what's my new thing to say about this? And that's the same with computer code as well. You know, you could look at computer code that someone has done to kind of get a really smooth, efficient system of something done. And you could, you know, use that code in your own if you say that you're using that code and your professor has agreed to that. Now, sometimes your professor will say, I don't want anyone else's code. I want you to tackle this problem originally and solve it with an original personal solution. In which case, you can't use other people's code in your code. But academic integrity is about understanding what it is your professor wants for a particular assignment, and then making sure that you are telling your professor and your GSI or conveying accurately to them what of that work is yours and what of that work is not. Let's talk about plagiarism. Plagiarism is one type of academic dishonesty, where you don't properly acknowledge the intellectual or creative work of others in your own work. Here are some examples. I'm going to just pause for a moment for you to take a minute and read these. Take your time. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so. So these are examples of plagiarism. Note that in each case, the student is not giving proper credit for the outside sources that they've relied upon for their own work. Here are other examples of academic dishonesty. Please take a moment and read these as well. I want to draw your attention particularly to one of the bullets towards the bottom there, allowing your friend to copy your homework as his or her own. This is one that, when I was a teacher, my students always were shocked at. They said, well, I did the work, I just gave it to my friend to use too. But that's also academic dishonesty. Your friend plagiarized, and you let your friend plagiarize. That's also a form of academic dishonesty because you are undercutting your friend's ability to do his or her own learning. I certainly, as a teacher, would drop both students' grades to 0 for that sort of assignment. And I've seen that here at Berkeley as well. When our international students have conduct issues, they have to come talk with us because it could affect your immigration records. And I speak to numerous international students a week who said, I just didn't know. I thought it would be okay to give my friend my notes or my friend my homework solutions. And it's just not. Notice that a lot of these, to be honest, are a little more undergraduate related. There's a lot of talk of homework or assignments, and you as grad students are not going to have so many discrete little tiny homeworks every night as you're going to have projects due every few weeks. And you may or may not be clearly in a group doing a group project or not. So there's a little less room in some of this for the sort of academic dishonesty that I've listed for you as grad students. However, I want to encourage you as grad student instructors to really watch out for this sort of thing and to be really clear with your undergrads about what the expectation is for each assignment. Let's have a few further discussion. Let's look. So how to avoid academic dishonesty? First, check your syllabus. Professors clearly state what sort of collaboration is or isn't acceptable, usually. Speak with your professors in GSIs if you're not sure, and note that assignment A and assignment B might be really different in terms of what the professor is wanting you to glean from that intellectually, and therefore you may be able to collaborate on assignment A but not B. If you're not sure, ask your professor. And then look at this third bullet. This is a really big one. I say this as a teacher, and I just mean it from my heart. Do a mental check. Before you hand in that thing to your professor, before you do the presentation or give them the project or do that final exam, is there anything you would prefer your professor at GSI not find out about how you did that work? Is there anything that feels a little kind of in some gray area? If there's a spectrum from totally fine to not fine at all, if you're in the gray area and you think, well, it's kind of towards the totally fine side, I want you to think that your professor sees that spectrum differently. And there's totally fine, and then from the gray area all the way to not fine is all not fine for your professor. So please don't take those risks. If you feel like you're in a sort of a gray area where I could see how you could say this is a problem, but it's really not, because I could argue that it's not. And I say this to my MBA and my law students in particular, if you really like to argue and look into the details and nuances of things and think about laws and technicalities, you're not going to win that argument. And I say this to all students, but particularly to our students who part of your goal and your passion is arguing and pushing for innovation here and there in rules. You're not going to win that argument with your professors. So if there's something that you wouldn't want your professor to know about your work, consider redoing the work. And then of course, take time to properly cite your sources or give them credit. Here's an example from a computer science syllabus that talks about academic dishonesty. I'll give you just a moment to kind of scan over this. You don't need to read it all in detail. Maybe focus particularly on the first paragraph and then skim through the rest. So notice this first paragraph is really specific. Exams and take-home quizzes have to be done on your own and you don't discuss them. But any other course activities like homeworks and so on, you can discuss your plan of attack or approach, like how am I going to approach this homework? Or what are some of the things we learned in class that could help us solve this problem we've been given? You can discuss that with your friends beforehand. But when you actually sit down to write the code that's going to solve that issue, you only do that on your own, / the last sentence says your homework and project can be completed in pairs. To be honest, I think the last two sentences are a little vague. So wait, should I always do the coding part on my own, or can I do coding with one friend? It's not clear to me. So here's a spot where I would actually ask the GSI or the professor for clarification. But notice that in general, this is really well laid out. They're saying we do want you to collaborate and we do want you to discuss these problems and problem solve, but the code itself has to come from your own brain and not your friends. The second paragraph talks about the dishonesty policy and explains that penalties range from a 0 on an exam all the way up to dismissal from the university if there's a second offense. That's big. And then the third paragraph, don't copy someone else's work, ask for help. Your TAs, that's another word for GSI, it's a teaching assistant. Lab assistants and instructors are here to help you. If you invest the time to learn the material and complete the projects, you won't need to copy any answers. I think that's a really big thing. That's a big thing for grad students, but I want to say again, for those of you who are going to GSI an undergrad course, I really want you, and I hope that you'll kind of remind students that their primary goal here is to learn. And so if they invest time in going to office hours, in studying, so one unit course means 1 hour of in-class time plus 2 hours of study. So remind students of that. This is a 2-hour class, so you've got 4 hours of study this week in this class. If you will invest that time, you don't need to copy. I hope that you'll kind of take that message to heart for yourselves and bring it to your students as well when you're teaching them. Consequences for academic dishonesty, as I mentioned, range from getting a 0 on a particular assignment to even expulsion or dismissal. But I want to state that for international students, the stakes are higher. If you're ever in a position where the school has suspended or expelled you so that you cannot enroll full time, we must end your J1 or F1 record, and we have to put a note that says, record ended for academic dishonesty. You have to depart the US immediately with 0 days grace period to get out. It doesn't mean that you can never come back to the US to continue studying here at UC Berkeley or at another school. But what it does mean is when you go to your next visa appointment, that note that we had to put about academic dishonesty is going to be there. The consular official is going to question you about your moral integrity and ask, how should I know that you're not going to be academically dishonest again? And you have to overcome that hurdle. Then, let's say 5 or 10 years later, you're looking at a different visa, an employment visa like H-1B or permanent residency even here in the US. All of your immigration history opens up for review and for scrutiny, including, that thing you did 5 or 10 years ago where there was one academic dishonesty dismissal. And, you felt like you've overcome that, but immigration-wise, that's always going to be on your record. So for our international students, academic integrity is also a way to preserve and protect your immigration status. Any quick questions on that section? Johannes, is plagiarism to use text generated by GPT-3? Oh, I have a smiley face. So I think this might be a joke, but I don't actually know what GPT-3 is at all. I hope that I'm responding to your question appropriately, and I hope that others maybe have gotten a joke. Johannes, if it's not a joke and you want to tell me what GPT-3 is, let me know and I can try to answer it for you. Yeah, I think that Adish, I think we could. Oh, maybe this is a response to Johannes. Maybe. Oh, it's a nerdy joke. Thanks, guys. Well, good. After this, I'm going to look up what GPT-3 is. It's a natural language model for text generation. Oh, yeah, I can see where you're coming with that. I think one thing just on this point is that students can argue a lot, like, well, how can I ever say something original? Like Isaac Newton said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. How can I possibly ever say something original? Am I not always referring to past sources? And I think that that's a fair point, but I think your goal is to always say where you're referring to past sources in that. And, I think things like art are, often pointing at past art to comment on it in their new art, and that's okay. But you'll want to kind of suss out what's the line between commenting on and extending some past work versus what's just kind of using it again. Johannes, thanks for the joke. I'm going to have to look up GPT-3. Okay, grad student support. This section should be pretty quick. So what supports can you expect here on campus? First of all, grad student advising. You're going to have academic advising at 2 different levels. One is departmental, so in your specific department, so journalism or chemistry or art and media. So your departmental advisors will help you with course selection, degree requirements, and getting your GSR and GSI positions. Then there's graduate division advising, and we call this for short Grad Div. Grad Div is a sort of governing body over all master's and PhD programs that says, what can we make that's standard so that it's fair so that we can make it fair so that somebody at the College of Chemistry and somebody in the College of Mathematics and someone in the College of paleontology or whatever gets the exact same sort of academic supports or financial supports. What if you, while you're here, you have a child? How can we make sure that just because you have a child as a PhD in chemistry, you're not treated differently than a PhD in or a master's degree student in the business program who has a child? There are certain ways that we should be making sure we treat all grad students equally, and grad is really the governing body that makes these particular rules that all grad students follow and that all departments follow as well. Grad Div is really, really your friend and your one-stop shop for what is it like to be a grad student broadly, not just in my department, but broadly across UC Berkeley. I encourage you to have a look at their website. And I've circled 2 spots, the About section, where you can kind of dig into what specifically do they do, and the Academic Progress section, because they govern how you move through the various pieces of your program, no matter what program you're in. Then something special for our international students. You guys have the academic advisors I mentioned, so departmental and grad div advisors, but you also have international student advisors. And I can't say this enough, any academic choice you make, so for example, God forbid, but you may get sick and you may need to actually drop below the minimum required units for your studies for a particular term. That's okay if you've got a doctor's note, but we need to approve that note and then add it to your immigration record. It does not hurt you, but we have to do it. If you've dropped below without our permission, that's an immigration violation. If you are moving up from a master's to a PhD level, or you decide, hey, I don't want the PhD, I'm going to stop at master's after all. Or if you're doing any employment, we want you to, on or off campus, we want you to come talk with us, because a lot of those choices that you can make also affect immigration. And immigration, unfortunately, sometimes there may be more freedom in what you can do academically in terms of what UC Berkeley's rules are, and a little less freedom in terms of what immigration will allow. Sometimes it's the opposite, that immigration will allow a lot of things, but UC Berkeley says, no, of those things you can only do, a limited number. But at any rate, you're always going to talk to 2 people at least about anything you're doing, the academic advisor or grad div advisor, depending on what the issue is, and then bring that to us as well for review and discussion. It's really our pleasure to work with you on these things. And actually, to be honest, I really enjoy working with master's and PhD students, because there's not complete flexibility, but there's a good amount of flexibility in the immigration regulations to allow you to do things that your program wants you to do. And so I really enjoy having those conversations to kind of help you figure out the roadmap. So how can we make possible the thing that you want to do? We can't always let you do that, but often we can kind of tell you the guardrails. Grad Student Assembly. So this is a sort of student council or student governing body that represents that represents all grad students. And there are various different, roles. So we've got the president here, vice president of equity and inclusion, an external affairs vice president, and the list goes on. But each of these people has been elected by other grad students to represent grad students to graduate division and to the university at large. I really recommend that you look into grad assembly, that you look into perhaps running for an office. I believe there is a grad student assembly representative for international students, and that could be you in the future. Other things that I think will be helpful and support you are this, and this one I want to really tout because I'm the one who wrote it. Intellectual property. A lot of you who are going into the STEM fields are going to be doing research, maybe with a corporate partner. So maybe if you're in computer science, you're going to be partnering with Intel or with Apple to make a brand new thing, or to come up with a brand new concept or a brand new process. And then the question becomes like, well, who owns that property or that process? The rules of intellectual property govern that question, or govern those questions. There are 4 main types of intellectual property. There are patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. When you're doing some research like this, you will be guided in detail on those topics, but I really hope that you'll have a look at these. This website is one that I made, and I'm just really proud of the work that's there. If you click on the 4 buttons that I've got there, again, patent, trademark, copyright, and trade secrets, I've written kind of a basic standard language, so not using any jargon or any technical terminology, but just standard language explanation of what each of these things is. And that's meant to kind of give you an initial guidance on that. I'm not going to go to that screen now, but I will drop that into the chat for you. So here's that link. And thanks again for indulging me as I talk about my own work here. Let's see. Okay, other things to help you. The Ombuds Office for Students and Postdoctoral Appointees. What a long name. Let me first make it defined. So an ombudsperson, look at this, the first line here under the title. What is an ombudsperson? An ombudsperson investigates, reports on, or helps to settle complaints. So if you are really struggling with a professor, or really struggling with your principal investigator, or just really having a difficulty with a colleague in your cohort, and you've tried talking to people in your department already about this, then you can go to the ombudsperson. Take a moment and just look at the bulleted list here of what an ombudsperson does do. Notice that the ombudsperson is not going to go up to bat for you. It's not like they're an attorney or an advocate for you, but they are going to, their professional career has been built on dealing with the sorts of issues that are big picture issue, very, very big to the individual grad student or postdoc student, and helping them solve those issues. So, these are professionals. I really, really recommend that you consider an ombudsperson if you need them. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat. Okay, let's go on to the libraries section. UC is a top research library, and the library is at your service. There are 36 separate libraries on campus. I think there are 4 or 5 big major ones, and then there are like 24, 25, maybe a little more individual, like small research libraries. It's the 4th largest research university library in the nation, and it holds tons and tons and tons of stuff, as you can see here. I want to give a big plug for going to these libraries physically. I know that we're, especially during COVID, we're in this, very technological, computer-driven world, and a lot of things you will be able to find only online at this point. But there are so many things that you can find in paper form that are just, there's a tactile experience of holding that journal in your hand and then sitting in a beautiful room like this to sit down and study. That's really different than kind of sitting in the little corner of your dorm room with a computer screen near your face. So I really want to encourage you to use a physical library system when you can. The library has a research catalog called OSCICAT. To be honest, I believe they've just changed over from OSCICAT, so I'm sorry I didn't update this. But you can kind of use a Google type search here, but a more detailed Google type search to understand what the library has to offer. They also have databases. So the library can't possibly physically hold all the things that it has access to. So a lot of what it has access to is actually digital. So UC Berkeley is paying various companies, various research organizations, and various other universities, frankly, to have access to what those places have, because those places have digitalized some things. And then we get access to those things digitally. That access is called a database. Each field, so each department in each field has probably purchased 2 to 10 databases worth of information that's very specific to your niche of study. And you can search those databases and then search for particular things in those databases. E-journals are another thing. So, a lot of journals are no longer printed in paper form, but there's a resource for looking up journal articles. And journals are kind of more timely, so they're more immediate versus like, here's a thing that's kind of a set in stone principle in our field. A journal is often on new research or upcoming research or speculative research. So you're kind of looking at something different than what you might be looking at with a database. Next thing, Berkeley does offer citation tools. So I've mentioned a lot about giving credit where credit is due and not plagiarizing. I know you guys probably know a lot about this because you're coming at the master's level, but Berkeley does offer citation tools here, and your particular department and field will also tell you which of these citation tools are and are not relevant for you. Finally, this is something I want to say, this is so cool that grad students can really dig down into this particular resource, and it's the actual librarian, the person, him or herself, who actually physically goes to the library. You can tell the librarian in your very, very small research library, maybe there's a chemistry library in particular, or there's a behavioral psychology library in particular, and you can say, here's a topic I'm looking for, and you can make that topic highly specific. Or you can go to the librarian and say, here's a question I have, and I'm just not sure where to even approach how to answer the question or what sources I should be looking at. You can bring that question to the librarian, and then the two of you will have a discussion about what are the various ways you might approach your question. And then the librarian will pull up sources for you or suggest sources for you, but they'll physically go through the stacks and just pull books and journals for you and hand them to you and say, this should probably help. So I think that is such a cool thing that Berkeley offers. You can schedule a 30-minute research meeting with a librarian, and then they'll do that work with you to get you the things that you need, both physical and online. Other academic opportunities. So summer sessions. As F1 and J1 students, you're required to be enrolled in your required terms of study. For most of you, that's just fall and spring. There are a few grad programs that start in the summer, and since your program starts in the summer, that summer term becomes required. But I'm kind of speaking more generally here. Generally, fall and spring terms are required, but summer is optional. But you're welcome to take as many or as few courses in the summer as you'd like. Some of these kind of help you get done with the quick classes that you need to get done with to move on to the specifics of your major. Check in with your department on what summer session courses might be good for you to take that can help you advance forward in your degree. You may also think of summer sessions as a time to take something that's not exactly towards your degree. So maybe you're really interested in learning a new language, but that's not related to your degree of chemical engineering. You could still learn that language, and you might do it over summer, for example. Opportunities to study and work abroad. This is mostly for undergrads, but there are graduate opportunities as well. And you as international students are allowed to take these opportunities. So the UC EAP program is a partnership between UC, so not just UC Berkeley, but all UC system, like UC California or University of California, and schools around the world. You can study at another school somewhere else in the world for 1 semester or 1 year, and there are 405 different exchange programs in 45 countries. So maybe you're a student from China and you are here at UC Berkeley, and you want to go study in France for a semester. You could do it. Again, trickier for a grad student than an undergrad, but it is doable. Same with Berkeley Global Internships. This is a program that will put you in an internship somewhere in the US or somewhere abroad as you prefer. extra information. So this isn't quite academic, but this is information that a lot of students often ask about. So how can you get involved at Cal? So Calapalooza is an activity fair held at the beginning of every school year. So the main walk through campus is called Sproul Plaza, and it's just a big open area. And in the first week or two of school, every club and activity group is going to have a table with signs and flyers about what they do. And I encourage you to walk through and pick up flyers for things that you might want to join. Decals, this is more for undergrads, but actually this may be something that you yourself are teaching. Decal is a course that stands for Democratic Cal. So this is an informal course of just 1 or 2 credits. It's often taught by a student who has gotten a syllabus approved by the university to teach some kind of unusual topic. So for example, punk music of the 80s and 90s, or philosophy in the Harry Potter series, or applying economics thinking to everyday decision making, things like this. So these are taught by students, but they're actual courses, and they're just low credit courses, 1 or 2 units. But it's a really cool way to kind of get to know students and know their specific interests, and to hook you into those specific interests as well. And you as grad students may be interested in teaching decals, so have a look at that website if you're interested. Cal Link is a database of all clubs and organizations at Berkeley. You can search by the type of club you're interested in. Our fancy phrase for gymnasium is recreational sports facility, RSF. This is where you can go to the gym just to work out, or you can join a game of basketball or whatever you'd like. You can join an exercise class. Then there are departmental clubs and organizations. So, you may be in a fraternal club or a sorority club, or you may be in a club related to your major. So if you're in engineering, you may be in the Engineering Honor Society, for example. Volunteer opportunities. You'll find that, I hope you'll find that not all, but a good number of Berkeley students really want to make a difference in the world around them. And you can volunteer in any way. You don't have to volunteer via UC Berkeley, but if you're interested in finding a way to volunteer, there's an office that offers all sorts of volunteer opportunities. And then of course there's, big Cal events, there's sports, there's parades and so on that you'll find out about through the year. Final piece of extra information is about employment, because I know so many of you want to know. If you are looking for jobs, and there are opportunities for both F and J1 students, not always, but at various points, to work off campus. Not at any job, but at specific types of jobs. So notice I'm being very narrow here. Can you work off campus? The brief answer is yes, but only at certain times, only in certain types of jobs, only for certain lengths of time. So you need to come talk with us at Bio about what those particulars are. But if you're looking for career coaching, so what's the exact type of career I'm looking for, or I'm writing a resume, I need help with it, or I just want to go to an interview practice and kind of, I know how to interview in my home country of Japan, but I don't know how to interview here in the US. What are some differences? The Career Center is available to you for free, and there are plenty of Career Center advisors. This woman here, Jing Han, used to be an F1 international student, and so she has a special place in her heart for our international students and wants to particularly help you learn to kind of translate your job hunting skills from your home country's culture to the US culture. I also want to recommend to you a few other things. So here's a Career Center site. Handshake is run by the Career Center. It's an online database of jobs available to Berkeley students. So all sorts of people throughout the US want to hire Berkeley students. And if they have reached out to Berkeley and said, hey, I'm looking for sociology students to do this work, or hey, I'm looking for econ students to do this work, that job description will be placed in the Handshake, and you can apply for those jobs or find jobs through Handshake. Finally, I really, really want you to check with us at Bio before you take any job on or off campus. Let's see, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I will show you something else. I'm going to stop sharing that PowerPoint. I'm going to show you one other thing on the, oops. I want to show you one other thing, or share one other thing with you, and then I will take questions. Here's the Berkeley International Office employment page. I'm going to put this link in the chat for you in just a moment. And I want you to notice some things. Just take a moment and look at these big 6 titles. Don't read the fine print yet, just kind of read the big 6 titles that we've got here. So if you're an F1 student or a J1 student, you can do on-campus work, whether it's in your field or not. So you might be doing a GSI position in your field or not. You might be working at a bookstore. You might be working in a library. You might be working in an on-campus coffee shop. Any work that's paid by UC Berkeley, you can do. But if you're a J1 student, you need to tell us that you're doing it because we have to document that on your immigration papers. If you click this, you will see details about this. So what are the differences? What are the things that are standard for both F and J1 students? And then what are the rules for F1 students and J1 students? So how are they similar? And then look into your particular visa type to understand those rules. Then F1 students have opportunities to work off campus in their field of study while they're still students through something called curricular practical training, CPT, and the opportunity to work off campus after they graduate through something called OPT, optional practical training. These pages talk about the rules for those 2 things and how to get authorized. Notice you cannot do either of these things without approval from bio or recommendation from bio first. J1 on-campus fellowships. So J1 students, you might be getting fellowships where you're just being given a grant of money. You don't have to work for it, but you're receiving income to kind of help you through your studies. F1 students, if you receive that, you don't have to report it, but J1 students do. And it's considered a sort of income or employment. So there's a little rule for reporting that to us, J1 students. Then J1 students, so I mentioned F1 students can work off campus both while they're students and after. So can J1 students through this thing called academic training or AT. So you'll want to look at this to understand how AT works. So for any J1s wanting to work off campus while they're a student or after they graduate, this is your spot to check. Finally, I should have mentioned this as well. Our F1 students, some of you will have the opportunity to do not just 1 year of OPT, but 2 more for a total of 3. So you can learn about that here. We do have a pre-arrival webinar that goes over all the details of employment, but I know this is a hot topic, and so I wanted you to be able to see this resource and see where you can find more details. You know, clicking into any of these leads you down a rabbit hole of a lot of information. I suggest that any topic of these that you want to look at, you plan to read this page for about an hour or so to kind of really get your head around what it is, what are the limits of it, what are the regulations, and what is the paperwork I need to turn into bio. Okay. I'll stop sharing. I know we're out of time. So I'm going to just quickly look and see if there are questions here. And if you've got more questions, just go ahead and add them. And if you need to go, I understand. Thank you for your patience. Siddharth, does a library catalog also catalog contents of department libraries? Yes, it does. Adish, Handshake is currently unavailable to us. Any idea when it's available? It's once you become a student, so it should be available to you in fall 2022. Most of you are starting on August 24th. It should be available at that point. Nithin, yes, this PowerPoint is being recorded and it will be put on our website at some point soon. I'm not quite sure when, but I'd imagine within the next few weeks because we want students who couldn't attend to be able to see this. Oh, Jana, you have better information than I did. Look at this, everybody, in Jana's comment. Your Handshake account will be created the first week of July or after you enroll in fall courses, whichever is later. Okay, so you know that does mean fall for most of you. It can take up to 2 weeks for your account to be created once these criteria are met. So for most of you, I would imagine that by mid-September, you'll have access to Handshake. Subham, what is the procedure after arrival? Do I have to physically report to bio? This is a great question. This is a little different for F1 and J1 students. J1, first of all, we have orientations for everybody. And I really hope you'll attend our orientations. They are going to be in person this year, which we're thrilled to be back in person with you. We'll have all sorts of food, so please come. F1 students are not required by F1 regulations to attend orientation, but I find so many times in advising that F1 students don't know something that they should have known and they didn't go to our orientation. And they're still responsible for knowing those things about their immigration status, and they don't know it because they didn't attend. So please attend. J1 students are required by federal regulation to attend an orientation. So please, J1 students, make sure you are going to attend our international student orientations. So the first part, Subham, is just attend the orientations. But then in order for us to activate your record, so right now, many of you are in an initial status, initial F1 or initial J1 status. Some of you might be transferring in and you're different, but if you're just coming for the first time with this new F1 or J1 document into the US, then when you arrive, you'll click into Cal Central, go to your task list, and you're going to find two things. One is an arrival confirmation. You're going to upload a document from the internet that is an immigration document that shows the day you entered, the status you entered in, and how long you can remain here. That document is called an I-94, and in the arrival confirmation task on Cal Central, we tell you how to find the I-94, and then we ask you to upload it. We want to make sure that there was no mistake at the border. You know, you came in on a J1 visa, but they actually marked you as F1. That would be a problem for you, and we want to make sure that you're properly, your entry was properly marked in immigration records. So arrival confirmation is number one. Number two is your local address. So some of you might already know where you're going to live, and others of you might still be looking. Once you arrive in Berkeley and you've got a local address, even if it's a hotel for the time being, or a place you're like an Airbnb, you report that address to us as your local address, and you'll add it to Cal Central. Once we've seen your I-94 that shows you're in proper status and that you've got a local address, we add that to your CVIS record, so to your I-20 or to your DS-2019, and that activates, oh, and then we also check that you're enrolled in classes. Those three things help us to activate your record. So those are the procedures you need to go through. You don't need to do that with us in person. You can do that online through Cal Central tasks. Sadab, great question. Where is bio located? We are not on campus anymore. We were on campus until just a few years ago, and then we needed to leave because our offices were needed for more dorm space for students. So we could not find an office directly on campus, and we're so sad about it. We are just a block or two off campus. If you get off of BART, which is our rapid transit station at downtown Berkeley, which is the main stop for UC Berkeley, there is a big brown building directly when you get up the stairs from BART. And we are on the 5th floor of that big brown building. I will put, let's see, here's our contact page and here's our address. We are on the 5th floor of that big brown building. Our hours for you to come in are these. Right now we're doing Zoom advising only, but you can drop in to pick up or drop off paperwork if needed. And I do believe that in the fall we'll be going back to some in-person advising during these times as well. Adish, I hope that I've answered your question about if we have walk-in hours. At the moment, just to drop off and pick up stuff. Hopefully pretty soon we'll have drop-in, walk-in hours for advising as well. We do have Zoom advising, I should say. Okay, any other questions? I'll just take a look at the chat to see if anything else comes in. Well, everybody, I'm so thrilled that you were here. Thank you for your patience. I know this went over just a little bit, but I hope the information was helpful. And I hope that I conveyed to you my excitement that you're coming to UC Berkeley in the next few weeks. We're really looking forward to having you here. Please don't be a stranger. Reach out to Bio for anything we can help you with. If it's immigration related, we are your go-to source. If it's academic related, we're going to be able to give you some kind of general guidance as I did today, but we're going to say, check with your department and get the specific answer, and then come back to us with that specific academic answer. And let's see how we can make that work within the immigration guidelines as well. We are really thrilled to see you coming this fall. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in just a month or so. Bye, everybody.